Hi guys, we're going to talk about the digestive system. This could be a noisy video. I got Charlie running around here, nosing around looking for treats, and I got Eloise downstairs binge watching Fuller House, so God only knows how much noise is going to be in the background. Good luck to you. So the main function of the digestive system is that we want to break food down into simpler molecules that are more easily absorbed and used by your body. And that's what digestion is. We're taking big things and making them into small things and eventually getting them down to the molecular level. Because your cells need glucose, but you can't be like, here cells, have an apple, and give an apple to your cells. You have to take that apple and you have to break it down into smaller chunks. So there are a couple different types of digestion that we're going to talk about while we go through here. There's mechanical digestion, which is where we just break food down into smaller pieces of that same food. And so I'll give you some examples of that. But like when we take an apple and we chew it down into a mush that looks kind of like applesauce, that's mechanical digestion. It's still apple. It's just apple in a slightly different form. But then there's chemical digestion. And with chemical digestion, we're breaking that food down and we're breaking it down into the individual molecules that make it up. So we're separating out those molecules. So with chemical digestion, no surprise, a chemical reaction is going to have to take place in order to make that happen. So again, the chewing of the apple into that mush is mechanical digestion, but then the breaking it down into individual molecules, that's the chemical digestion. So the main parts of our digestive system, and I'm going to talk more specifically about each of these later, is we have the mouth, we have the pharynx, the esophagus, and the stomach. Oh, by the way, that is a pharynx. It is not a pharynx. It is a pharynx. The Y comes before the N, so it is a pharynx. The esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, and the large intestine. Some other helpers, and again, I'm going to talk more specifically about them. We have the salivary glands, the pancreas, the liver, and the gallbladder. They're all going to help us out in various places. And then there are secretions that come out of all of those. Secretions is such a good word. Secretion just means basically a juice that comes out of whatever that structure was. Okay, so in the mouth, you have teeth that cut, tear, and crush food into smaller pieces. So you know what happens when you chew. You take a big bite of something and you chew and chew and chew and you get smaller pieces. So what kind of digestion is this? Good. That is mechanical digestion. But then you also have the saliva that makes the food wet and soft, and that's going to help with that mechanical digestion. So, fun fact, the release of saliva is a reflex that's controlled by the nervous system. So right now, I want you to stop and I want you to think about pizza and ice cream and chocolate cake and big juicy cheeseburgers and everything that's delicious. And I bet what you're noticing right now is that your mouth is filling up with saliva. And that's because your brain is hearing those words of things that sound delicious to you. And it's like, oh, yay, we get to eat. Let's get ready. And so it's producing this saliva to get ready for you to digest it. And it's a reflex and it just happens. It's just there. Okay, so there's an enzyme in your saliva called amylase. And that amylase starts the breakdown of starch. So it starts taking those big long starches and breaking them down into individual glucose molecules. That's why starches and carbs are so delicious, because once they get into our mouths and we start to break them down, we get that sugary taste. And that sugary taste is yum, 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 good. We love it. Okay, so what kind of digestion then is amylase doing for us? Yes, chemical digestion from amylase. All right, so then what? So then the food gets swallowed and it goes into the esophagus via the pharynx. The what? The who, the what now? Okay, so here's a side view of some poor unfortunate soul who had his head cut in half so that we could see the inside of him, but we appreciate his contribution to science. So here's the pharynx, and the deal with the pharynx is that you've got this cavity that goes from your nose and then goes down to your trachea. And then this is your trachea here. And then you have the cavity that goes from your mouth and goes to your esophagus. But there's this area in between that is shared. And so both things, both your esophagus and your trachea, have a shared area in the beginning. This is why you can do that really cool thing where if you make somebody laugh while they're drinking, you can make them shoot orange juice out their nose. Because in fact, what happens is they're drinking and then they shoot air up this way. And so then the liquid comes out this way. Gross, but it's all because of the pharynx. Okay, so in order for the food to get into the esophagus, there's this thing called the epiglottis. And the epiglottis folds down and covers your airway or your trachea that we're going to talk about later. Folds down and covers your airway to cover it up so that food doesn't go down into your lungs. And so when we talk about food going down the wrong pipe, these are the two pipes we're talking about, the trachea and the esophagus. And so if your epiglottis doesn't get closed fast enough, or if your epiglottis is weak, then you can have trouble with choking and food going down the wrong pipe. Okay, so the food at this point is what we call in the form of a bolus. And a bolus is just a fancy word for a ball of chewed up food. You have muscles in your esophagus that are going to squeeze the food progressively down in this process called peristalsis. And peristalsis really just involves this series of tubular muscles that are squeezing that ball of food. And so these muscles squeeze, and then the ball of food goes down a little farther, and then the muscles squeeze and the ball of food goes down, and then these muscles squeeze and the ball of food goes down, and these muscles squeeze and the ball of food goes down. And it's this progressive series of just squeeze, 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 and so the ball of food goes down, 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 down. It's not gravity. Gravity is not doing this. You can drink a glass of water while you stand on your head if you want to, because it's peristalsis that's getting the food into your stomach. It is not any sort of gravity just dropping food down into your stomach for you. Okay, so what kind of digestion happens in the esophagus? Hopefully you said none. There was no digestion going on in the esophagus. The food didn't get broken down. It just got moved. It's just a transportation. Okay, so then the food is going to leave the esophagus, and it's going to go into the stomach through the cardiac sphincter. And the cardiac sphincter is just a little ring-shaped muscle that's just an opening between, it's a juncture between two things. It's also called the lower esophageal sphincter. And the reason it's called the lower esophageal sphincter is because it's in the lower part of the esophagus. And it's a sphincter, like I said, it's just a ring of muscle. And that's just connecting the esophagus that comes down here to the stomach here. Now, it's also called the cardiac sphincter because your heart is right here. So it's the sphincter on the heart on the stomach that's closest to the heart. So cardiac sphincter makes sense then. So in the stomach, your stomach muscles are going to churn and mix the food, and it's going to slish and slosh and smoosh and moosh and do all of that. And it's going to help break down food because there are these rugae, and rugae are these cool bumpy ripples that are inside your stomach. You can see this turned inside out stomach. It's kind of cool. But you have all these bumps, and it has the same effect as like a washboard. So in the old timey movies, you see people are down by the stream and they're washing their clothes in the washboard, and it has those bumps that help you kind of like beat the dirt out of your clothes. And so the rugae just help give you more contact, more surface area contact to hit that food and get that food like ground up and churned up into smaller and smaller pieces. Okay, so what kind of digestion is that then? Good. Hopefully you said mechanical digestion. We didn't have any chemical reactions taking place. But there is hydrochloric acid in the stomach. And everybody knows the stomach is acidic. We talk about that all the time. It's one of those things you learned in grade school and sort of is common knowledge. Now you know that it's hydrochloric acid specifically that's there. And then there's also an enzyme called pepsin. And I know pepsin doesn't end in ace, but it's still an enzyme. So I didn't name it. I don't know. It would be called something different if it were me, but I didn't name it. So it's pepsin. Pepsin is an enzyme. And pepsin is an enzyme that breaks down proteins. And you can remember that because it breaks apart peptide bonds. So pepsin breaks apart peptide bonds. All right, so if we're breaking down proteins and we're breaking the bonds, then what kind of digestion is this? Good, that's chemical digestion. Now, here's a fun fact. Hydrochloric acid is not there to break down food. So, the acidic environment in your stomach is not there because the acid sort of boils away food. That's the way we think of it, right? Like we kind of think of it like I don't know, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles getting like their DNA all boiled and mutated and turned. That's dumb. But here's the thing. Hydrochloric acid doesn't actually break down food. That's not why the hydrochloric acid is there. It's not like some bubbling, sizzling, boiling away the food kind of thing. That's not it. The reason the hydrochloric acid is there is because pepsin needs an acidic environment in order to work. Pepsin is a protein that will only work in an acidic environment. And so the hydrochloric acid is there to make it so that your stomach has an acidic environment so that the pepsin can work. Okay, so the HCl is not doing digesting of food. That's not what it's there for. It's there to create the right environment for the pepsin. So the pepsin is sort of the main star there, and the hydrochloric acid is like the hype girl for the pepsin. It makes the environment the right environment for the pepsin to do its job. Now, one other thing the HCl will do is if you get microorganisms, so if you eat some microorganisms along with your food, which you're always doing, it will help break down some of them too. Okay, so an acidic environment is fantastic for pepsin. That's exactly what pepsin needs. But it's a terrible environment for amylase. And so if amylase denatures, what does that mean is going to happen or not happen? Okay, hopefully you figured out that what that means is that carbohydrate digestion is going to stop. The amylase is going to denature. And if the amylase denatures in that acidic environment, then carbohydrate digestion is going to stop. Wah, wah, wah. All right, the slimy goo that's in the stomach consisting of the stomach juices and that partially digested food is called chyme. Chyme, like challah bread, it's chyme. So chyme is that stuff. So we went from the bolus of food, dropped down into the stomach where we've got these juices. The juices in the bolus of food slosh around for a while, and that's our chyme. All right, so what's next? The chyme is going to move out of the stomach, and it's going to move through a sphincter called the pyloric sphincter and into the small intestine. So we had the bolus of food went from the esophagus past the esophageal sphincter or the cardiac sphincter into the stomach where it sloshed around, and the rugae helped with mechanical digestion, and the HCl and the pepsin helped with chemical digestion. And now we have this solution called chyme, and the chyme is going to move past the pyloric sphincter into the small intestine. So the small intestine is called small because it's narrower in diameter than the other intestine. It's actually much longer than the large intestine. So a human small intestine is about 6 meters long. That's almost 20 feet. That's 4 of me. So if you stood me on my head 4 times and then you took my small intestine and you stretched it out, that's how tall it would be. That's bananas. And it's super tightly coiled, just like your DNA and your chromosomes. But a human large intestine is actually only about 1.5 meters long. So about 5 feet. So it's about as tall as me. So you've got me versus 4 of me. Okay, so the small intestine is not small then because it's short. The small intestine is small because it's narrow around, and the large intestine is bigger around. So as we look at this image, this is the small intestine here, and this is the large intestine here. Okay, so the small intestine is coiled up kind of inside the large intestine in a human. All right, so the small intestine has 3 parts. The duodenum, practice saying it, duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, So the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum, and they go in that order when you go from the stomach. So you leave the stomach, go through the pyloric sphincter to the duodenum, which then goes into the jejunum, which zigzags back and forth, and then you go to the ileum, which is the last part. So in the duodenum, digestion is going to continue. And at this point now, some enzymes are going to come in from the pancreas. This is the pancreas right here. Okay. And what's going to come in is those enzymes, but then also sodium bicarbonate. And sodium bicarbonate literally is just baking soda. Now it's not like shaking a box of baking soda in there. It's a solution, but sodium bicarbonate is going to come in, and that's really, really basic. Okay. So think about, why would you want that sodium bicarbonate to come in there? Okay, good. We need to neutralize that acidic solution. That acidic chyme that just came out of the stomach now needs to get neutralized. So if we take the acid and the base and we add them together, we now have a neutral environment again. So the enzymes from the pancreas are going to pick back up with carbohydrate digestion, and they're going to continue protein digestion. So we lost carbohydrate digestion in the stomach because the amylase denatured, but now we're back to a neutral environment. Some new enzymes are going to get kicked in there, and they're going to pick up with carb digestion. Also, some different enzymes are going to come in that are going to continue with protein digestion. So what kind of digestion is that? Good, chemical digestion here. Now, the liver and the gallbladder are also going to send in bile. And bile helps break down fats from big globs of fat into tiny little bubbles of fat. So you've got big fats going down into smaller fats. That's what bile does for you. So what kind of digestion is that? Good. That's mechanical digestion. So even though we're taking one solution and mixing it with another solution and we're breaking something down, since we've got fats just becoming smaller fats, that's still just mechanical digestion. But there's one more enzyme that comes from the pancreas called lipase. Okay? Lipase is another enzyme from the pancreas. What do you think lipase does? And why do you think we need bile and lipase? Okay, so hopefully what you said is that the bile is going to break down the fats from big globs to smaller globs, but then the lipase is actually going to break apart the fats into their individual components so that then we can use those individual components. So if we've got a triglyceride, it's going to break it apart into the glycerol and the fatty acids so that we can use them that way if we need to, so that we can break the macromolecules down into individual monomers maybe to help us out. Okay, so just here's another image so you can see sort of how close all of these things are. So here's the liver that's going to produce bile. Here's the gallbladder that's going to store that bile. Here's a duct called the common bile duct. That's going to send that bile to the small intestine, to the duodenum of the small intestine. And then you can see the pancreas right here too. And the pancreas also has this little tube that's dropping the enzymes and the sodium bicarbonate into the small intestine so that then the mechanical and chemical digestion can happen there. And then you see in the human how close all of these things are. So just a side note, you can see here how if somebody gets liver cancer or pancreatic cancer, how it's so incredibly dangerous because look how close those organs are to each other. Look at how integral they are to each other. And so if you've got a tumor in one of those places that's metastatic, it's just going to be that till it gets to another one of those organs and then to the next organ and the next organ and the next organ and the next organ. So that's why these are some of the more deadly cancers, because they're so close to these integral organs that you just have to have, and it's so easy for those tumors to metastasize. All right, so what happens in the jejunum? So we had lots of digestion that happened in the duodenum. In fact, we had more digestion happen in the duodenum than happened in the mouth and stomach combined. So we really, probably before you walked into this class, you probably didn't think that the small intestine was really that important in terms of digestion. Well, it turns out the small intestine is more important than your mouth and your stomach because that's where so many things are getting digested. Think about it. In your mouth, all you had was carbs getting digested. In your stomach, all you had was proteins getting digested. But in your duodenum, you had proteins, carbs, and lipids all getting digested. Duodenum, holla. Okay, so in the jejunum, then, those individual molecules are going to get absorbed. So our nutrients are going to get absorbed. The chyme is going to keep moving through the intestines. And the way they move through the intestines, they actually have their own kind of peristalsis. Just like the esophagus had peristalsis, there's peristalsis in the small intestine as well. And nutrients are going to get absorbed in the jejunum. The small intestine is the only place where nutrients get absorbed in your body. It's the only place nutrients come in. And the reason they can come in is because the inside of the small intestine is lined with villi. And villi increase the surface area so that you can have maximum absorption. Again, here we are again with that surface area thing. If you get lots of little nooks and crannies and bumps, you can have high surface area, and high surface area means more space for good things to happen. And in this case, we're not talking about chemical reactions happening, we're talking about absorption of nutrients. And so if we've got all these bumps, that's awesome, absorption of nutrients. Well, here's what's even cooler. The villi have villi of their own called microvilli. So while you have the villi that are going up and down and up and down and up and down, they even have their own little microvilli that are going up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down around them. So just think about the insane surface area inside your small intestine with all of those villi and microvilli, and then how much absorption can be happening. All right, so on to the ileum. In the ileum, those bile acids get reabsorbed. They go back to the liver to get made into more bile, and then they get stored in the gallbladder. That bile gets stored in the gallbladder so that it can come back in for digestion again. So this is kind of a recycling location. This is where we're going to take our bile salts back up so that we can reuse them again. The ileum is also the place where the body is going to absorb vitamin B12. And you need B12 just because it's used for nerve cells and red blood cells. Okay, so duodenum, digestion, jejunum, absorption, ileum, recycling the bile acids. Okay, so again, duodenum, digestion, jejunum, absorption, ileum, reabsorption of the bile acids. All right, we're almost there. Okay, so by the time the food leaves the small intestine, there are almost no nutrients left. The only thing that's left is water, cellulose, which we can't digest, and anything else that we can't digest, like when you swallowed a penny on a dare in 3rd grade. So anything your body can't digest is left in there, plus water. And cellulose is one of those things. Cellulose is what we generally refer to as fiber when we talk about it in our food. So from the small intestine, the food is going to move past the ileocecal valve, which is like a sphincter, but it's a valve, and it does the same thing as a sphincter. It's just a connecting place. So from small intestine to large intestine is the ileocecal valve. The large intestine is also called the colon. So sometimes you'll hear people refer to the colon. We talk about colon cancer. We don't talk about large intestine cancer, but it's the same thing. Okay. So in the large intestine, first thing is there are bacteria all over the place in there, and it's okay because you need those bacteria. If you wipe out those bacteria, you are hosed, Homer. You need them. So it's okay. There's tons of bacteria in there and you need them, and that's good. You provide them with food and a place to live, and they provide you with other services like producing vitamins like vitamin K that you can't get anywhere else. So what do we call that relationship? Good. That's symbiosis, and it's mutualism. It's good for you and it's good for them. It works well. Don't wipe those bacteria out. You need them. All right, other than housing bacteria, the main job of the large intestine is to absorb water. This is our water absorption location. So I want you to think for a minute to what happens if your large intestine absorbs too much water from the chyme passing through. So the chyme passes through and the large intestine sucks out too much water. What's going to happen? Okay, you're going to get constipated. That's where you're going to have your poop gets really, really hard because all the water got taken out of it, and you're going to be sad. So then what happens if your large intestine doesn't absorb enough water from the chyme passing through? Yep, that's when you get the diarrhea. That's what my mom used to call it when we were little. That's what diarrhea is. Your large intestine isn't pulling enough water out of your waste products, and so that water is staying in, and then you're having to pass it out. Okay, so then what? Anything that hasn't been digested or absorbed is passed out of your body through the rectum, and it passes through the anal sphincter. Sorry, I thought I had a picture of a rectum and an anal sphincter for you. I don't know, who knew? That would have been a great picture, but I guess I don't have one. Anyway, so the rectum is the very end part after your large intestine, and then there's another sphincter that goes to the outside of your body that passes everything out. Another fun fact that I don't have on here, I read or heard in a video at some point, is that something like 75% of your poop is actually bacteria. Think about that. Think about your poop the next time you poop. I know you don't want to, and I'm super grossing you out right now. But something like 75% of it is bacteria. Only 25% of it is actually undigested material from stuff you ate. That's crazy, especially if you think about how microscopic bacteria are. What? That's a lot of bacteria. And then think about how much bacteria is still inside of you. My God, it's mind-blowing. Okay, so fun fact, solid waste moving past the anal sphincter is actually a reflex. Okay, so you moving solid waste out of your body is actually a reflex. What that means is that when you got potty trained when you were little, when you were like 2 or 3, and your parents potty trained you and they taught you how to hold it till you could get to the bathroom, they're actually teaching you how to control a reflex. So it's kind of like if I go like this and you blink, okay, it's teaching you to not blink when I go like this. Okay, but that it's different because it's going to the bathroom. But we expect 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds to learn how to do this. And they do, even though it's a reflex. That's cool. Here's another fun fact. The inside of your digestive system is actually the outside of your body. What? That doesn't make sense. How is that possible? Well, I'm going to show you an image on the next slide. I'm going to let you take a look at it. I'm going to let you think about it. And then we'll talk about it when I see you again. Check it out. There it is.